Hi, and welcome to Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is where actually micro and macroeconomics will start to diverge. So now when I talk about economics, it actually means microeconomics. So I'd like to go ahead and jump into our PowerPoint. Let me share my screen with you. And here we are, that one. Share. Okay. So here we are. In this objective, what we're going to do is to take a look at really how supply and demand determine the quantity of goods produced and the amount that that buyers will buy. Okay, so our first objective here is to take a look at, okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is look at supply and demand. And basically what you want to do is to think about demand is based upon the buyers. How much are buyers willing and able to purchase at various prices? So demand has to do with buyers, okay? Supply has to do with sellers. How much are sellers willing and able to make available at various prices, okay? So we're going to talk about this as we move throughout Chapter 4. We'll focus specifically on the buyers and upcoming objectives, and then we'll focus on the suppliers. But before we do that, we want to talk about what a market is. And this is the definition for a market. So you can see here that this is the demand side because we're talking about buyers, and this is the supply side. Okay? And buyers as a group determine the demand for the product. And again, to be a buyer, you have to be willing to purchase that and able to purchase that product. I might be willing to purchase a Ferrari, but I'm not able to do so. Likewise, sellers as a group determine how much of the supply of the product is there. And they too have to be willing to make this and able to make this. And we'll see that cost many times enters into the decision about how much they're going to produce. So there are different types of markets, and some are very organized. So for example, if we're talking about agricultural commodities and the organization of that market, you're going to see a little bit more government intervention here in those types of markets. Less organized might be a particular ice cream shop in a particular town, so much more micro in focus. Okay, so the first market we're going to talk about is a competitive market. And there are some characteristics. And the first characteristic is that there are many buyers and many sellers. Because there are many buyers and many sellers, that means each of them, buyers or sellers, doesn't have any more power than the other or has a negligible impact on the price because there are so many. So price and quantity are determined by all buyers and sellers. And so what we would say is that everyone in this market is a price taker, not a price maker, okay? Because there's so many of them available. Now, the second characteristic of a perfectly competitive market is that the product is homogeneous, or the product is all the same. Maybe a good example here might be some kind of agricultural market, like maybe the agricultural market for apples. An apple is an apple is an apple. Now, granted, there are different varieties, but let's say that we're talking about Golden Delicious, right? So if you're going to buy a Golden Delicious apple, you're not buying it based upon anything other than price. And that's why we say in this market, everyone is a price taker. Okay, so no single buyer or seller has any influence over the market price. And this is a key idea, that everyone is a price taker. Buyers will buy all they want, sellers can sell all they want in these perfectly competitive markets. The second type and polar opposite of a perfectly competitive market is a monopoly. And here we only have one seller in the market. And we would say that they are a price maker, because if you're the only one that produces something, let's see if I can do this price maker, okay? Then you get to set the price, okay? So all the power in a perfectly competitive market rests with the supplier because they're the only ones that produce this. Okay, this is why during the COVID crisis, you saw the President of the United States enacting to some degree the authorization or the command that certain companies, for example, GM, started to produce face masks because it was a governmental mandate. Why? Because if we only went with the suppliers of face masks and everybody wants them, then the price would go much higher than it currently is. Some of us remember prior to COVID, if you wanted to buy a face mask, they were readily available at a very cheap prices. Now the price has quadrupled because there aren't as many suppliers. There are two other markets that we talk about, and those two other markets, oops, let me back up. One is monopolistic competition. And in monopolistic competition, what is different about that is that the product is no longer all the same or homogeneous. The product is differentiated, which gives suppliers a little bit more power than buyers. Okay. The third, or the fourth, actually, I should say, is an oligopoly. In an oligopoly, there are a few relatively large producers. So again, because there are a few concentrated producers, they will tend to have more power. So if you look at this, you can kind of draw a continuum between the power structure, like who has power in the market, and we can go like this, okay? And we'll say that the power on this side resides with the buyer. The power on the right-hand side here is vested in the seller or supplier. What this means then is that buyers have all the power in a perfectly competitive market. In monopolistic competition, the seller's starting to get a little bit more power. In an oligopoly, the seller's starting to get a little bit more power, and the seller has all the power in a monopoly. Okay, that's the end of this learning objective, and I'll see you back in objective 2. Thank you.